The girl is the final error, and this error knows how to call its own name. We don't expect to find miracles in places built to forget, but sometimes even rust can reflect light. Talreth 11 was a place the stars had turned their backs on, a dead zone, a skeleton of steel and dust where industrial giants once screamed with life, now lying in silence. The wind didn't howl here. It just whispered through the hollowed scaffolding like a voice too tired to speak up. Towers leaned like dying men. Synthetic vines choked out forgotten corridors. Power nodes sparked faintly like dreams refusing to die. Kael Rhoen moved through the ruins with the quiet of someone who didn't want to be remembered. His boots made no sound on the cracked metal. The old hood he wore masked most of his face, but even if it didn't, no one alive on this moon would recognize it. At least no one who wasn't trying to kill him. He wasn't here for salvage. Not anymore. That part of his life ended the moment the Technar put a price on his head and erased his registry. Since then, he had become a whisper, a virus that refused to die sleeping in the back alleys of forgotten systems. Talreth was perfect for him. It didn't ask questions. Until today. The containment pod was half buried in a pile of collapsed cargo hulls and bent plasma rods. It blinked. Not loudly. Not like the other failed biopods he'd seen around the junkyards. This one pulsed. A slow, struggling pulse. Blue light seeping out from under a dented panel. Kyle stopped. That wasn't normal. His hand went to the sidearm on his hip just in case. No movement, no ambient drone chatter. No perimeter trip alerts, just the pod blinking like an exhausted heartbeat. He approached crouched low. The panel was still intact enough for a quick read. Partial lock. The temperature stabilized. Life form inside. Cal narrowed his eyes. He slipped a tool from his belt, wedged it into the override seam, and twisted. A hiss escaped. Pressure equalized. The hatch began to slide open. Inside, curled like a frightened animal, was a small child. Cal didn't move. She wasn't human. At least not entirely. Her skin shimmered with a lavender hue that shifted with the light. Bioluminescent threads pulsed just beneath her surface, like a second vascular system. Her hair clung to her face and her eyes. Her eyes didn't look like a child's. They looked older than him. She blinked once. Cal didn't speak. She didn't scream. Didn't flinch. Just stared. Slowly, cautiously, he reached in and lifted her into his arms. She weighed less than he expected, as if her bones were hollow or she hadn't eaten in days. Her skin was cold but alive, and underneath her pulse, there was something else. Something strange. His retinal implant began glitching the moment she touched him. 2 neural signatures. 1 body. Kyle's mouth opened for a breath he didn't remember holding. This wasn't just some abandoned alien. This was a problem. A very loud problem wearing a very small body. Back at his shelter, deep beneath the coolant tunnels of Talreth's lower grid, Kael worked fast. She was stable, her vitals strange but not failing. He wrapped her in thermal layers, ran diagnostics, cleaned the worst of the bioresidue from her skin. His gear hadn't been used in years, but it still responded to his voice print. The girl lay still on the slab. Occasionally, she'd twitch or mutter something in a language that didn't register on his translators. Then finally, she opened her eyes. He had the lights dimmed low just enough to see his hands. "Are you him?" she whispered, voice cracked and hoarse. The one who didn't leave Kael paused. He hadn't heard a child speak in over a decade, not even in his dreams. He walked over and crouched beside the slab. The girl tried to sit up, then gave up. Her hands curled close to her chest. "My name is Nexa," she said, barely louder than a thought. "I think I'm broken." He stared. Not because he didn't believe her, but because it was the kind of thing someone says when they've been told it too many times. After a long moment, Kael finally spoke. "You're not broken." Nexa blinked. Her breath hitched. It was quiet, soft, but something shifted in her posture, like she'd stopped bracing for a blow. Kael turned away and powered up his old console. There was a data pod embedded in her containment cradle. Fried on the outside, but the inside had a neural residue signature. He extracted the imprint, loaded it into a sandbox, and watched as the message decrypted. A woman's face appeared. Pale skin, graying buzz cut, burn scars along her jawline. She was speaking fast, breathless. If you're seeing this, it means they found me. And I failed. Again. They're going to come for her. Don't trust the mercs. They're not mercs anymore. They're hard-linked. She looked away, then back. Her voice cracked. She's not just a hybrid. She's the anchor. If they plug her back in, the whole system resets. Another pause. Her eyes glistened. Kael, I hope it's you who finds this. Because you're the only one who still knows where the flaw is. The one you left behind. Use it. Kael leaned back from the screen. He hadn't heard that voice in over 10 years. But he remembered. Syria Vin, ex-architect of Technar neural infrastructure, the woman who tried to blow the whistle before they wiped her records. She'd used his name, his real one. He looked back at Nexa. Her breathing had calmed. She had curled into the thermal blanket like a child pretending sleep could protect her. But Kael knew better. There was no protection now. The moment he broke that seal and pulled her from the pod, 100 silent systems had started counting down. They would come for her, and for him, and maybe, just maybe, for a second chance at something neither of them had been allowed to have. Family. The first ping hit Kael's neural interface just before the second cycle of Talreth's false dawn. It was faint like static brushing the edge of a memory, just enough to make the retinal HUD glitch for a second. He sat up immediately. No hesitation. His breath slowed, mind already running through old threat protocols. That kind of ping wasn't environmental. It was personal. He glanced at the diagnostics. Nothing in the room had shifted. Nexa was still sleeping, curled beneath the thick thermal sheet, her bioluminescent veins dimmed to a faint pulse. But something outside had stirred. Kael connected his cranial port to the deck and began scanning the outer perimeter. There was nothing on the standard bands. No drone chatter, no engine hums. But beneath the static, buried like a whisper under layers of noise, he caught it. 3 unique neural frequencies. Unregistered, mobile, approaching. He unplugged quickly, cursed under his breath, and moved toward the old gear locker. Years of dusted memory greeted him. He had not opened this locker since the day he promised himself he would disappear. That promise had just expired. He pulled out the black exosuit armor, more skeleton than fabric, and locked the frame onto his shoulders. It still fits. Muscle memory took over. Within seconds, he was a shadow wrapped in alloy and readiness. Behind him, Nexa stirred. Her eyes opened slowly, taking in the armor, the dim lighting and the tension that now radiated from Kael like radiation off a broken core. "Are you going to fight?" she asked. Kael turned toward her helmet, still retracted. "Only if they give me a reason." "Who are they?" Kael didn't answer. He walked to the wall console and opened a hidden port, then activated the external turret relay with a pulse code he had not used in nearly a decade. Outside, the scrap-covered upper levels of Talreth groaned as energy hummed to life. Above them, 3 shapes descended through the haze. They were not human, not entirely a machine either. Tall and narrow, covered in living metal with limbs that adjusted shape mid-motion. Each one carried multi-configured weapons grafted to their arms. Their faces were smooth, expressionless plates of reflective alloy, and behind those plates pulsed the glow of Technar's signature cores. Enforcers. Kael pulled Nexa behind him, shielding her with one hand as he activated the internal sensors. The first enforcer landed silently. The second triggered the security perimeter with a burst of kinetic pressure. The third vanished from the sensor view entirely. That was the one he was most worried about. Kael took aim with his pulse weapon and fired without a word. The round slammed into the first enforcer's chest, forcing it back into a collapsed girder. Sparks flew. It twitched, but it did not fall. He grabbed Nexa's hand and moved. She did not ask questions. They ran through the lower maintenance tunnels, ducking under dead machinery and faded emergency lights. Nexa's breathing was rapid, but she kept pace. Her feet slapped the floor, but she never stumbled. Kael activated the fallback route, forcing a rusted bulkhead open with the override rod. Inside, the old secondary server room still pulsed with residual energy. It smelled of oil and memory. He dragged an old shield emitter online and closed the blast door behind them. He crouched and checked Nexa. She was shaking. "I hear them," she whispered. Kael stiffened. "In your head." She nodded, eyes wide. "It's like they are calling me. Not with words, just knowing. Like I'm a node. a path they can walk through. He touched her forehead gently, then checked his scanner. Her neural activity was rising. The dual signals within her were no longer passive. They were syncing. "They called me Anchor Point 1, she said softly. Kael froze. Anchor Point. Teknar's mind control system had once spanned thousands of light years. It had been built on a framework of 3 central nodes known only by whispers: Anchor 1 Anchor, 2 Anchor 3. All 3 were said to be destroyed. If she was Anchor Point 1, then Teknar's whole network still had a living root, and they were here to claim it. He activated the hidden hatch in the floor. Below them, a vertical shaft led into the deepest sector of Talreth. The shaft was not on any schematic. He had built it himself long ago when he still believed in redundancy. "We have to go," he said. "Where?" she asked. "Somewhere they forgot." They descended by grip rail, his boots sparking against the shaft wall. The air grew colder, denser. Below, old lights flickered into life as ancient systems recognized his genetic signature. They stepped into a chamber lit by a single red core. Nexa stared. Kael stood silent. "This is a memory chamber," he said. She looked at him confused. "Not for people, for systems." He touched the central console. A soft chime echoed as it scanned his print. The floor shifted slightly. "Welcome, Engineer Rhoen," said a synthetic female voice. Nexa stepped back. "That voice, it sounds like me." Kael said nothing. She moved toward the core, mesmerized. He watched her, then spoke. "This was where I tested the failsafe, the one flaw they never found, because I buried it in the code, and in someone like you." Her hands trembled. The light touched her face, and her skin lit up with glowing lines that matched the pulse of the core. Kael connected his neural jack to the system. It resisted. Then I gave in. "Project Anchor," he commanded. "Decrypt all legacy files." The core hesitated. "Authorization key." Kael looked at Nexa, then back at the console. "Syria," he said. The chamber unlocked. Lines of light spread across the walls. Data streamed in every direction. Teknar's darkest secret had just been opened again, and this time Kael would not close it. The room breathed, not literally, of course, but when the ancient neural core lit up in concentric pulses, you could feel something shift in the air, as if the very systems surrounding them had exhaled after years of silence. The walls were etched with motion, now crawling with decoded symbols and fragmented memory. Nexa stood in the center of it all, bathed in red light. Kael kept his eyes on the projection. He didn't flinch, didn't blink, as Syria's voice filled the space once again. "Project Anchor was never meant to control minds," she said, her tone low, precise and heavy, with something more than guilt. "It was supposed to safeguard memory, to restore identity to those who'd been reconditioned by Teknar. But they changed it, twisted the code." Kael clenched his jaw. The old pieces of the puzzle were starting to return, but they didn't fit the way they once did. He had believed she died before the transition to full control. Clearly, she had survived. Long enough to implant Nexa. Long enough to plan one final defiance. "I buried the seed protocol," and her Syria continued. "She's the key, not just to access the network, but to overload it. A living null cipher. If they complete the link, she resets everything. Every mind, every node is wiped clean." The recording cut abruptly. Silence followed. Kael exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. Nexa looked up at him wide-eyed. "Does that mean I make it stop?" Kael nodded once. "Yes, but not without risk." "Will it hurt?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned to the far console and typed in the old command string, the one he had written himself under contract back when he still thought loyalty could be sold. "It might," he finally said. "But it won't break you." She frowned. "How do you know?" "Because you're still here," he said, voice softer than before. He stepped back from the console and opened the file list. At the very bottom was a designation he had once prayed to forget. Anchor Point 1 Organic Contingency Model. Prototype 0.1, he selected it. Another projection appeared. This time it wasn't Syria, it was Nexa. Not as she was now, but as a fetus. Wrapped in artificial womb fluid, her DNA code rotating beside her image, like a crown of spiraling symbols. Kael's hands curled into fists at his sides. She wasn't just a child. She was built. Syria had used her own genetic template combined with something ancient, a species code that had long vanished from the known archives. Kael recognized the markers. He had helped write the masking code that buried them in untraceable folds. He had helped hide this. Nexa stared at the image in silence. That's me, Kael nodded. Then what am I? He looked at her, really looked, and for the first time answered honestly. You're a weapon they were too afraid to fire, and a memory they couldn't erase. She didn't look angry or scared, just hollow. Like her understanding of herself had cracked and she hadn't decided yet whether to pick up the pieces. A faint beeping interrupted them. Motion alert. North quadrant. Surface breach. Kael's expression darkened. They're here. Above them, the enforcers had finished their sweep. The lead unit descended through the broken stairwell, its legs bending with unnatural fluidity. Its fingers extended into scanners, each one searching for a specific biological resonance. It found it. Nexa's. A pulse of light spread from its chest. The signal traveled through layers of rock and wiring, a silent shout meant only for the network. Connection established. Kael felt it like a punch in the spine. His vision blurred. Neural echoes rippled across his interface. Nexa cried out, clutching her head. They're inside me, she gasped. Kael reached for the backup jammer coil and slammed it against her spine. The signal dropped momentarily, but not enough. Her hands shook. Light was spilling from her fingertips now like strands of data-made flesh. The old failsafe code was activated. Don't let them take me, she whispered. Please. I won't, Kael said. He turned to the console. There was only one move left, one trick he never thought he would use. The flaw. When Kael had helped build the original codebase for Technar's network, he had slipped in a recursive vulnerability buried so deep it would take years to notice. If triggered from within the main broadcast station, it would overload the control grid and cause a cascading memory dump. He had never told anyone, except Syria. And now apparently Nexa's very existence was the trigger. He brought up the failsafe subroutine. One input remained, voice verification. He stared at Nexa. Say your name. She blinked through tears. Nexa. The system paused, then accepted the input. A timer appeared on screen. Neural pulse sequence, armed impact window. 17 minutes, Kael stood up. We need to reach the surface. But they'll find us. They already have. He handed her a small disk. If they get to me, press this. What does it do? It lets me finish the job, even if I'm not breathing. Her lip trembled, but she took the disk. They moved quickly, navigating the old passageways through the reactor core and into the shaft leading up to the surface. Every echo of their footsteps felt like an alarm. Nexa's light was dimming again, but Kael could feel the weight of her growing. Whatever she carried inside her was awake now. They emerged into the mid-ruins of Sector 12. The sky above Talreth had turned a sickly orange, the atmosphere thick with charged particles. Then he saw her, Syria, alive. She stood across the plaza, disheveled and breathing hard, a pulse cannon slung across her shoulder. Her eyes met Kael's, then Nexa's. She froze. Nexa, she whispered. The child stopped. Their eyes locked. Mother, Nexa said. Before anything else could be said, the enforcers arrived. 3 shapes, 1 goal. Reclaim the anchor. Kill the rest. Kael stepped forward. This ends now. They came without sound. The air in the ruins shifted just slightly as 3 enforcers broke from the shadows. Their bodies moved like mercury flowing over debris with mechanical grace. One dropped from a rooftop, landing in a crouch that sent a quake through the broken tiles. Another slithered from the side alley, limbs clicking and reforming. The last approached straight on its mirrored face, reflecting Nexa's dim glow. Kael stepped in front of her without a word. His pulse weapon hummed to life, red lines dancing across its surface. Syria moved beside him, lowering her rifle but keeping it aimed. Same model class, she said under her breath. Upgraded plating. They're expecting resistance. Kael didn't answer. His eyes stayed locked on the center enforcer. It took 1 step forward. Nexa unit. Resync initiation incomplete. Compliance requested. The voice was cold modulated, but there was something off about it. Like a whisper trapped behind static. Nexa didn't move. Syria raised her rifle. She's not a unit. She's a child. Anchor designates do not qualify as civilian life forms. Kael spoke then. His voice cut the air like a blade. She's not your anchor anymore. The enforcer tilted its head slightly. Then without warning it struck. Kael lunged forward. His pulse round hit the enforcer's shoulder, throwing sparks. The creature spun, redirected its momentum, and charged again. Saria fired a spray of ion burst, forcing the others to scatter. But they weren't aiming to kill. They wanted Nexa intact. Kael barked a command. Run! Nexa hesitated, then turned and sprinted, heading toward the broadcast spire, visible behind the wrecked buildings. That was their destination. The pulse needed line of sight to the grid relay, and the spire's height was the only way to ensure full activation. Saria covered Nexa's retreat with a wall of fire. Kael engaged the lead enforcer, trading blows that rattled the air. The creature's limbs shifted into blades, then whips, then shields. It learned fast. But Kael fought dirty. He used the terrain, drew it into tight corners, forced it to waste energy. Then he struck its core with an overcharged round and dropped it into a chasm of broken concrete. 2 more to go. Saria grunted as she was knocked into a wall. Her shoulder armor cracked. Kael reached her, helped her up, and together they pushed toward the spire. They found Nexa crouched at the base, hands shaking a panel open before her. I don't know how to finish the sequence, she cried. Kael dropped beside her. You don't have to. You just need to hold it together. I can feel them. They're in my head again. Then push back. I don't know how. Kael grabbed her face gently, eyes steady. You're not a weapon. You're not a system. You're a person. And if you choose not to listen to them, they can't take that from you. Her eyes welled with tears. Behind them, Saria yelled. The second enforcer had reached the platform. It moved like wind and knives, slicing through Kael's barricade with fluid ease. Nexa stood. Her light grew brighter. The enforcer raised a hand. Resync now. No. Nexa's voice didn't shake. The light around her intensified. I am not a protocol. I am not a number. I'm Nexa. And I choose not to obey. For a moment, everything paused. Then the enforcer lunged. Kael shot it midair. The blast staggered it. Not enough to kill, but enough to slow. Saria launched an EMP dart from her wrist gauntlet, striking the base of its spine. The creature howled a mechanical screech that pierced the air. Kael turned to the panel. Seconds left on the countdown. The final input needed to be confirmed by the organic key. He looked at Nexa. She placed her hand on the pad. The system blinked. Pulse verified. Launch sequence finalized. Then came the sound that wasn't a sound. A low hum filled the ruins. The sky shimmered. Across the horizon, towers and relay dishes flickered, their internal lights dancing in chaotic rhythms. Teknar's grid was reacting. Kael grabbed Nexa and pulled her behind a support beam. Now we wait. A moment later, the world changed. The sky lit up. A wave of invisible energy swept across the planet, carried by the relay towers into orbit, and from orbit to the network's deep core control stations across systems. Minds enslaved in distant colonies awoke. Command ships in the void went dark. Enforcer signals failed, and the last enforcer before them simply stopped. It turned its head, then lowered its arms. Directive lost, it said. Then it fell. The silence that followed was immense. Kael sat down on the rubble, body shaking. Nexa collapsed beside him, head resting on his arm. Saria joined them, bloodied but alive. It's done, Kael said. Saria looked toward the spire. And yet I don't feel peace. Kael gave a tired laugh. Peace isn't a feeling. It's the silence after you stop running. They stayed like that for a long time, not because they didn't know what came next, but because for once no one was chasing them. The ruins of Talreth 12 were quiet again. Not the kind of quiet born from desolation, but a different silence. The silence that follows when chains finally break, when no more orders echo in the back of a mind, and the signal that once dictated thought has been severed for good. Nexa sat on the cold metal edge of the collapsed broadcast platform, her legs swinging slightly above the dust. She stared at her own hands, still faintly glowing along the veins. The light was softer now, more like a heartbeat than a warning beacon. Kael was nearby, scanning the upper perimeter with a handheld scope. He didn't speak. He hadn't said much since the pulse had fired. Not because there was nothing to say, but because too much had been said already. Saria returned from her sweep of the northwest corridor. She had new bruises forming on her cheek, and one side of her armor was scorched, but she moved like someone who was no longer running. There was a steadiness to her now, one that hadn't been there before. "They're gone," she said quietly, setting her weapon down and leaning against a shattered pillar. Kael nodded once. "No more enforcers, no signals. The sky's dead." She looked at him, and the child she's still processing. Saria glanced toward Nexa, who was now quietly drawing lines in the dirt with her finger. "I built her to endure," she said, voice hollow, "but I didn't prepare her for the choice." Kael turned to face her fully for the first time since the fight. His eyes were tired but alert. "You gave her a future. That's more than most ever got." Saria's jaw clenched. "I gave her pain." Kael shrugged lightly. "She's not the only one." A long silence stretched between them. Then from behind a small voice interrupted. "Am I still—" They both looked at Nexa. She didn't turn around. "Am I still the anchor, or did I break it?" Kael walked over, sat beside her. "You didn't break it. You released it." She blinked up at him. "Then why do I feel empty?" Kael hesitated, then answered slowly. "Because when you've carried the weight of a galaxy's control grid in your spine, freedom feels like falling." Nexa nodded, though she didn't fully understand. "Not yet." Saria joined them and crouched beside her daughter. "You don't have to carry anything anymore," she said, brushing a strand of hair behind Nexa's ear. "No one gets to tell you who you are now. Not even me." Nexa turned her head slowly, looking directly at her. "You're my mother." "I wasn't a good one," Saria whispered. "I made you into something no one should have been." "You came back," Nexa replied. "That's good enough." Saria's breath caught in her throat. Kael looked away, blinking more than necessary. They returned to Kael's hideout before the second cycle of dusk. The sky had turned pale green, a side effect of the disrupted atmospheric filters still adjusting to the sudden drop in Technar relay activity. Talreth, like most forgotten worlds, had depended on Technar's grid for basic environmental regulation. Without it, the system would need time to balance. Inside, Kael began shutting down the emergency systems he had activated. The shielding rigs, the interference web, the backup generator loop. All of it could finally rest. Saria spent the next hour going through old files Kael had archived. She found fragments of her own research, old code strings she'd long thought deleted, and even a recording of a child's laugh, the first test they ever ran on Nexa's neural receptivity. Back then, the plan had been hopeful, before it became a cage. Nexa sat on Kael's workbench, legs swinging, watching them quietly. Eventually, she asked the question, "What happens now?" Neither adult answered right away. Kael leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. "You're not safe here anymore," he said. Saria nodded. "Even if the enforcers are down, Technar's remnants will want the system back. And if they find out you're alive, they'll try to rebuild." "But I broke it," Nexa said. "Didn't I?" "You broke the network," Kael replied. "Not the idea." Saria met his eyes. There was an understanding between them, now born from fire and regret. "We need to disappear," she said. "All of us." Kael didn't argue, but Nexa frowned. "I don't want to disappear. I want to help others. The ones who were like me. The ones they built." Kael looked at her. "You'll be hunted." She nodded. "So were you." He smiled. A small one. The kind that had to fight its way through old scars to reach the surface. Saria hesitated. "There's a place," she said finally. "South of the canyon shelf. An old maintenance nursery. We could clear it. Set up shielding. It's buried enough to hide from scans." Kael checked his maps. 50 kilometers. Rough terrain, but doable. He looked at Nexa again. "You're sure?" She didn't blink. "I want to build something that can't be hijacked. A place for children who want to be people, not tools." Saria let out a long breath. Kael walked over to the bench and tapped the side of Nexa's boot with a knuckle. "Then let's go build it." They left at dawn. Kael carried the last of the supplies on his back. Saria rigged the path with remote charges to collapse the tunnel behind them. Nexa walked between them, humming to herself. She held the pulse disc close to her chest, even though she didn't need it anymore. Talreth faded behind them, a graveyard of machines, a monument to silence. But ahead across the horizon, something waited. Not safety, not peace, but something they had not had before. A beginning. The canyon was cruel. Even without pursuit, the path south tested every part of their body mind and what little trust had begun to form. The ground beneath their feet shifted constantly, a lattice of fractured metal and scorched glass from a terraforming failure, long before any of them were born. The sun, if it could be called, that pulsed weakly through clouds too thick to clear, casting everything in a tired silver glow. Kael walked at the front, scanning for seismic instability. He rarely spoke. Occasionally he would stop, crouch, and press his palm to the ground, feeling for something beneath the surface. Nexa noticed he did it more when Saria wasn't watching. Saria walked at the rear, pulse rifle slung over her shoulder, her attention divided between the scanner in her hand and the small girl now walking more confidently between them. Nexa, for her part, asked questions. Lots of them. Why does the sky feel heavy here? Did Teknar build this place or break it? Do you think memories can rot like metal? Kael answered when he could. Mostly he just listened. The girl who once spoke in whispers was beginning to take up space. She still glowed faintly, especially at night, but the light was calmer now. Steady. It no longer flickered with fear. They camped beneath the ribs of a collapsed transport freighter on the third night. Kael lit a low thermal coil more for comfort than warmth. Saria watched the stars emerge through the shattered hull, trying not to look like she was counting them. Nexa curled up with an old scanner Kael had given her. Is it true, she asked, that I was never supposed to live? Neither adult answered right away. Kael finally said, you were supposed to function. But not live, Nexa repeated. Saria reached out and touched the girl's shoulder. I broke the plan the moment I gave you a name. That night Kael did not sleep. Not because he felt danger, but because for the first time in years, he wasn't sure what he would do when danger didn't come. By day 5, the canyon walls narrowed. They had reached the outer rim of the nursery Saria had spoken of. According to the maps, it had been a genetic modification facility used for pre-education constructs. Kael knew the type. Places where they taught the rules before children learned what choices were. The main gate was buried beneath a rock slide, but Kael found the side access port. The security was still barely active. Saria helped him override it using a hybrid splice of her Teknar credentials and Nexa's unique code. As the door opened with a hiss, stale air rolled out. They stepped into a long hallway. White tiles, now dust-colored. Rows of stasis pods lined the walls, most cracked and long dead. The power grid flickered on the floor, still functional but slow. Nexa moved through the corridor in silence, her hand brushing the glass of one pod. The face inside was frozen in sleep. Or maybe something worse. Saria stepped forward and activated the primary console. This place wasn't meant for survival, she said. But we can change that. Kael ran diagnostics. Core systems could be repaired. Atmospheric controls, filtered power loops, even the old nursery AI are all salvageable. This could work, he muttered. They cleared out the main chamber first. Nexa found old mats, scattered storybooks, even a half-functioning holoprojector that played strange, flickering bedtime songs in languages none of them recognized. By nightfall, the place no longer felt like a tomb. It felt like a home waiting to remember. They named it the Renewal Garden. Not because it was pretty. It wasn't. Most of the walls were still scarred, the lights too dim, and the wiring an absolute mess. But something about the name made Nexa smile. Kael installed perimeter defenses and rewrote the station's ID beacon. It now broadcasts a non-classified maintenance tag, posing as a remote recycling node. If Teknar still had satellites in orbit, they would see nothing of interest. Saria rewired the AI and set up filtration systems. She even found a few emergency growth kits stored deep in the sub-level engineered food stock that could be adapted to feed at least 6. On the 7th day, the first child arrived. He was older than Nexa, probably 10, maybe more. Thin, silent. Eyes wide and teeth gritted like he was prepared to be punished for existing. Nexa saw him first. She walked to the gate, her glow catching his attention. You're safe here, she said. He didn't reply, but he didn't run. 2 days later, another arrived, then another. By the end of the 2nd week, there were 6, all different, some hybrid, some modifications. One had no vocal cords. Another had hands that shimmered like fluid. They didn't talk much, but they watched Nexa, and she talked enough for all of them. Kael sat in the old comms room, rewiring a panel when Syria entered. She held two mugs, one steaming, one not. He took the steaming one. "I forgot you knew how to be domestic," he said. Sipping. "I used to have a kitchen once," she replied. They sat in silence for a few moments, listening to the sounds of faint laughter echoing through the hallways. "They're going to need more than shelter," Kael said eventually. "I know. They'll need teachers, defense, a future." Syria nodded. "And you'll give them that?" Kael looked at her serious. "No, we will." She smiled small and tired. "I never thought I'd hear you say we again. I didn't think I'd mean it." Outside, Nexa sat with the other children, a hollow stick in her hands, tracing constellations on the floor. She laughed. Kael watched her, then turned back to Syria. "This isn't over. Teknar won't stay dead forever." Syria leaned back. "Then we make sure when they come back, they won't recognize what we've become." The renewal garden breathed differently now, not in mechanical pulses or flickering lights, but in rhythm with the children who had begun to call it home. The halls echoed with hesitant footsteps, sometimes laughter, sometimes silence. The place no longer felt haunted. It felt watched, but in a gentle way, as if the walls themselves were learning how to be kind. Cal spent most of his time rebuilding the shielding core. He had rerouted half of the original relay network to act as a decentralized firewall, cloaking their presence by bouncing their signals through a dozen hollow satellites left to rot in Talreth orbit. It wasn't perfect, but it would hold for now. Syria had taken on something more subtle. She became a pattern spotter, watching how the children moved, how they clustered, who spoke, and who didn't. She was building trust from fragments. Every act of routine brushing hair, handing out rations, repairing torn tunics was its own form of apology. Nexa had become the bridge between the two. She sat with the others, told them stories. Stories not of freedom, but of becoming. She never said it directly, but her words planted a seed. "You're not what they made you to be," she told a boy with metal-threaded irises. "You're what you choose to keep from them." Cal had overheard it while passing. He hadn't said anything. But that night, when he adjusted the output of the internal comm system, he logged her voice into the root protocol of the garden's core AI. She was becoming more than just an anchor. She was becoming a leader. One morning, Nexa entered the comms room with something clutched in her hand. Cal looked up from a half-stripped panel. "What's that?" She uncurled her fingers. A drone shard. Smooth. Scorched. But unmistakably recent. "I found it near the canyon edge," she said. "It wasn't here yesterday." Kyle stood slowly. Syria entered moments later, sensing the tension. He held up the fragment. "Scout class. Silent relay. Passive recording only." "Meaning what?" Syria asked. Kyle looked at her grim. "They found our echo. Maybe not the signal, but the disruption." Syria's eyes narrowed. "Could just be a wandering eye." Kyle shook his head. "No. It was aimed. Right at the entry shaft." Nexa watched them both. "What does that mean?" Kael met her gaze. "It means the silence is ending." They fortified. Not out of panic, but precision. Syria began training the older children in basic evasion and defense. Nothing violent, nothing reckless. Just awareness. Where to hide. How to lock doors. How to move without noise. Cal worked day and night. He wrote a defensive perimeter protocol tied to the old gardening drones. Most were rusted and outdated, but with a few tweaks, he turned them into mobile sentries. Nexa helped too. She had begun learning how to interface directly with the AI. Her presence smoothed the system responses. Her touch stabilized glitching routines. Kyle didn't understand how, but her voice could reset failing circuits. Like she was more than organic. Like the system remembered her. On the fourth day after the shard was found, the outer motion grid triggered. 3 kilometers out. No signature. But Kyle knew better. Syria joined him in the observation room, weapon in hand. "You think they're coming?" He nodded, quietly this time. Nexa entered behind them. Her hands trembled, but her voice was steady. "If they're coming for me, I'll go." "Alone?" Kyle turned quickly. "No. They'll follow me anyway." "They don't just want you," Syria said. "They want what you proved was possible." "Then what do we do?" Kyle stared at the monitor. The map blinked slowly. Then finally he spoke. "We move them." "The kids?" Syria asked. "All of them." Where there's a backup node, it's off-grid, buried in the volcanic range north of Sector 80. I never activated it. It's dark. Saria frowned, but it's days away, maybe weeks on foot. Kael turned to her. Then we don't walk. Kael and Saria descended into the oldest section of the renewal garden, below the nursery levels beneath the geothermal well. There, hidden behind 3 rusted bulkheads, lay a relic, a transport skimmer, sleek, compact, built for silence and speed. He had built it during his first years in exile, imagining one day he might need to vanish forever. That day had arrived. It needed work. Power cells were degraded, steering core misaligned. Saria got to work without needing to ask what came next. Above, Nexa explained the situation to the children. She didn't lie. She told them the truth in the softest words she had. They found us. Some looked afraid, some angry. One asked, "Are we going to die?" She shook her head. "No, we're going to move. And when we move, we'll grow. We'll become something they can't find anymore." The boy with the shimmering hands stepped forward. "Will there be stars?" Nexa smiled. "Yes, and none of them will belong to Teknar." By the time the perimeter grid finally went silent, the children were already loaded. Kael sat at the front of the skimmer, piloting manually. Saria monitored the rear sensors, one hand always near the emergency lock. Nexa sat between them, watching the landscape shift from broken glass plains to ash-covered foothills. Behind them, the renewal garden faded into memory, but it did not vanish. Kael had planted a final seed in the code, a silent transmitter that would only activate when someone with a resonance signature like Nexa's came near. It would sleep, and maybe one day someone else would wake it. That night they made camp beneath an overhang shaped like a half-buried tooth. The children slept in soft huddles wrapped in thermal mesh. Nexa sat beside Kael, her eyes watching the stars. "I was scared," she said quietly. "I was too," he replied. She leaned into his shoulder. "Will it always be like this?" Running, Kael looked up at the sky. "No. One day we'll stop, and then we'll build something, even if they can't tear it down." She was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Do you think they'll remember us?" Kael smiled faintly. "They'll remember what you did, and they'll remember what came after." Saria joined them, then sitting cross-legged, gazing at her daughter. For the first time in years, her eyes held no calculation, only pride. "We're not just running anymore," she said. "We're planting roots." The volcanic range was a place even the old maps avoided. Ash clouds drifted across the upper atmosphere, and the terrain was carved into jagged ridgelines like scar tissue left behind by an angry world. The soil hissed underfoot. Nothing grew here. Nothing called. Nothing moved unless it had a reason. Kael guided the skimmer into a narrow crevasse between black cliffs, slowing only when the onboard sensors confirmed structural stability. The children had grown quiet over the journey, the kind of quiet that meant they understood. This wasn't a game. It wasn't a mission. It was survival, but with purpose now. As the skimmer coasted to a halt beside a cracked outcropping, Saria stepped out and scanned the ridge. "It's here. The access node is beneath the rock bed 20 meters down." Kael adjusted his glove, then activated the seismic lift. The stone groaned as old servos pushed open the hidden hatch. Beneath it lay a circular passage coated in volcanic glass spiraling downward. A corridor no one had walked in decades. Nexa stood at the edge, staring into the dark. "What's down there?" she asked. Kael replied without looking back. "A place no one could find. Until now." The descent took an hour. The corridor was half collapsed in some sections. In others, the walls shimmered with fragments of preserved code lines of obsolete machine language, burned into the metal like a forgotten prayer. At the bottom they found it, the secondary core. It looked like a tree made from wire and bone branches spreading across the ceiling roots, sunk into the earth. This was not an official Teknar facility. This was something older repurposed. Kael approached the control interface. It didn't greet him. Instead, it greeted Nexa. "Welcome, Anchor Seed," Authority recognized. The children shuffled behind her. Nexa tilted her head. "I'm not an anchor anymore." The system hesitated. Resonance acknowledged. Identity evolving. Kael stepped in. "Begin system sync. Authorize reconstruction overlay protocol." The lights responded. One by one, the old panels flickered on. Air scrubbers hissed. Internal climate control rumbled like a heartbeat returning after long slumber. Syria turned slowly, surveying the vast chamber. It's more intact than I expected. It was designed to be forgotten, Kael replied. That's why it survived. Nexa wandered toward a curved wall where ancient interface nodes blinked weakly. She placed her hand against one, and her skin glowed faintly in response. A recording was activated. Static at first, then the face of a woman appeared. Not Syria. Older, pale, eyes lined with pain and hope in equal measure. This facility was the last echo of the original Eden Protocol. If you found this, then something has gone wrong. Or maybe something has finally gone right. Kyle stiffened. I know that voice. Syria leaned closer. It's the founder, Kael Voss. Nexa turned. That's your name. Kyle didn't answer. The message continued. This node isn't just a shelter. It's a reset seed, containing every blueprint for a civilization that can't be corrupted by control systems. Biology, code, ethics, it's all here. The message ended. The silence that followed was thick. Syria broke it. You were part of the original Eden build-out, Kael finally spoke. His voice was low. I helped design the first resonance matrix, before Technar turned it into control architecture, before they paid us to forget what it was supposed to be. Nexa looked up at him, eyes wide. So this place, it's what the garden could have been. Yes, he replied, without the cages. They worked for days. Kael restored the power grid, pulling energy from thermal vents below the crust. Syria activated the genetic library. It was incomplete, but had enough to grow clean food and synthesize medical compounds. Nexa took to the systems naturally. She no longer asked questions with fear. She asked them with intent. What if we rerouted the old interlink to broadcast a misdirection beacon? What if the air filters can be tuned to sense memory residue? What happens if we don't hide? But shine, Kael smiled at that one. It wasn't a plan he was ready to follow, but the idea mattered. The children planted things. They weren't flowers. They were nodes, seeds encoded with simple directives to spread communication without hierarchy. A kind of decentralized memory. Nexa had come up with the design herself. One of the younger children, a girl with mirror eyes, asked what they were for. Nexa replied, they're for remembering what they did to us, but also what we chose to become. One night the system chirped. An alert. Not local, galactic. A Technar fleet had gone dark. Another had defected. Whispers began to spread through hidden channels about colonies waking up. About entire systems where the control signals no longer worked. About survivors building something new somewhere out beyond the grid. Kael read the data in silence. Syria leaned over his shoulder. You think it's because of the pulse, I think it started there. But it didn't end there. He looked up at the children sitting together in the corner, drawing constellations on the wall with chalk sticks. They're not rebuilding what we had. They're building something else. Syria tilted her head. You scared, Kael took a long breath. No, not anymore. Nexa stood outside the hatch the next morning, watching the ash clouds part briefly to reveal a sliver of blue sky. She held a small device in her hand, a beacon, not for help, but for invitation. Kyle approached. You sure? She nodded. There are more like us. I want them to find a way home. He looked at the horizon, then back at her, then lighted. She pressed the switch. Far above the beacon pulsed once, softly, a signal encoded not with command but with choice, an invitation. Come if you want, build if you believe, be more than what they made you. The beacon sang quietly for days. It was not a cry for help, it was not a scream into the void. It was a hum soft and persistent, a promise carried on threads of silent code through a sky made of ash and old echoes. It did not demand. It was an invitation. And slowly they came. The first were a pair from the shattered moon of bricks, one with mechanical arms that trembled with each movement, the other without a mouth, her face replaced with a biosensor grid that flickered faintly. They arrived in a limping crawler with mismatched tires and broken headlights. No names were given. None were asked. They simply came. And they stayed. Next to family, not by blood but by survival. A man with a limp that could have been from a mining collapse, a woman whose eyes never met anyone's, and a girl about Nexa's age. The child carried glowing marks down her back, pulsing runes no one could explain. They had no answers for what she was, only the conviction to protect her. Kael met them with the same silence he had given to everyone else. No questions, no challenges, just a nod and an open gate. Saria watched from the control loft above the main corridor. Her arms were crossed, but her eyes were softer now. Cautious still, yes, but no longer guarded like before. When the third group arrived, she did not reach for her weapon. That was progress. Nexa met every arrival. She greeted them not with orders, but with options. Not with rules, but with the quiet assurance that they would not be used. Her words carried more than comfort. They carried the truth. "You are not what they made you for," she said. "You are what you choose next." Kael woke one morning to the sound of laughter echoing down the corridor. He stepped out of the diagnostics room and saw it. A cluster of children racing down the hall, magnetic chalk sticks in hand. They were tagging the walls with glowing phrases and symbols. Not random marks, not scribbles. Stories. One phrase repeated across multiple surfaces in a dozen hand styles. "I choose to stay." Kael stood motionless watching, not because he doubted them, but because those words had once belonged to him, a private vow spoken into the dark when he had first chosen exile instead of compliance. Now the children had made it their own. That night, as the corridors settled into stillness, Saria found Kael in the shield maintenance chamber. He was adjusting the relay timing on the outer defense field. She handed him a warm drink, then sat beside him on the floor. "I saw the walls," she said. He nodded. "It was her idea," he replied. "She's becoming more than a voice." Kael looked toward the ceiling where old dust clung like forgotten thoughts. "She's becoming what we never dared to be." Saria leaned back on her palms. Her voice lowered. "Do you think they're really gone?" Kael took a long breath. "Not gone, just wounded. Systems like that don't vanish. They rot slowly, trying to regrow." She nodded. "So they'll come, eventually. And when will they do?" He looked at her. "They won't find what they left behind." The renewal core shifted with time. What once felt like an abandoned bunker now moved with life. The walls held warmth. The lights responded faster. Even the air tasted cleaner. The place had stopped being a hiding place. It had become a beginning. The children built without instruction. They converted the dormant cryo bay into a greenhouse using scavenged light panels and nutrient beds. A former drone pit was transformed into an amphitheater for stories and songs. One of the older children learned to tune old signal loops into music. It was dissonant, beautiful, and made others weep for reasons they could not name. Nexa organized daily gatherings. Not mandatory, not structured, just moments. Moments where stories were shared. Not of pain, but of survival, of quiet victories, of things learned in the silence of captivity that still mattered in the freedom they now claimed. Then came the signal, a flicker, barely detectable. Kael caught it on the long-range relay as he was adjusting the spectrum scrubbers. No ID code, no signature, just a pulse. He studied it for 3 hours before deciphering the core. Echoes heard, following the light. "Will arrive soon." The pattern embedded in the transmission was one he knew intimately. It was part of the original Eden protocol. Saria entered the room just as he played the final audio ping. "Someone survived," she said. Kael nodded. "Someone remembers." He brought Nexa in, showed her the message. She stared at it for a long time. "This means we're not the only ones," she said. Kael responded quietly. "No. And now they're coming to find us." The next week, more travelers arrived. One was a former Technar researcher who had defected years ago, carrying what remained of a corrupted database. Another group had fled from a moon where the control grid had failed completely, leaving chaos and hunger behind. Each one brought fragments, stories, blueprints, warnings. Kael and Saria listened to them all. Nexa did more. She took their pieces, both technical and emotional, and began weaving them into a new framework. Not for defense, for connection. On the 14th day after the first signal, the beacon pulsed again. This time it was stronger, clearer, a transmission from deep space. Kael decoded it and watched as the message unfolded on the monitor. A face appeared, tired, smudged, grinning. "You lit the spark. We're following it." No name, but the voice was enough. Kael leaned back. Saria stepped beside him. Nexa read the last line of the message out loud. We are not alone, and we are not done. Kael looked toward the children gathered in the atrium. They'll come, he said. Nexa nodded. And we'll be ready. The stars overhead had begun to shift. It was subtle, but Kael noticed. They didn't flicker the way they used to. One constellation, once buried behind layers of industrial ash and magnetic interference, had emerged clear for the first time in decades. The atmosphere over the renewal core was clearing, not because of weather, but because the network that once bent nature to obedience was now silent, and silence gave nature room to remember itself. He stood outside the upper ridge watching the sky. His fingers were stained with alloy grease. A fresh scar cut across the ridge of his hand just under the glove. Nothing life-threatening, just proof of work. Below in the courtyard, now cleared of rubble, the children were planting again. Not data seeds. Real ones this time. Nexa was in the middle of it all, kneeling in the soil with a boy who had never spoken, and a girl who only communicated through color pulses in her palms. She had somehow learned to interpret them. Kael smiled. She was building language where others had abandoned words. Inside, Syria was meeting with the newcomers. There were more now than she had ever expected. The latest arrival was a captain from the old rebellion sectors, gray in the beard, younger in the eyes. He brought with him 3 refugees and a battered carrier loaded with MedStim's old education chips and something else. Kael had seen it when he first scanned the cargo, a partial Technar core. Locked, sealed, but still powered. Saria asked the question first. Why bring it? The captain shrugged. It's better we learn how they think before they remember how to hunt. Kael entered the room quietly and nodded. Keep it isolated. I'll study it when I have time. The captain stepped back. You're Kael Rhoen, aren't you? Kael didn't respond. He didn't have to. The captain lowered his voice. The things they said about you... I don't care what they said, Kael interrupted. What matters is what we do now. And just like that, the conversation ended. Later that night, Nexa joined Kael in the central hub. She was taller now, or maybe she just stood straighter. Her glow, once erratic and frightened, had grown steady. She no longer shimmered like a warning beacon. She radiated. I've been watching the way people speak to each other, she said, sitting beside him. Kael continued tuning the old defense monitor. They hesitate less now, she continued. It's like trust is growing, slowly, but it's real. He glanced at her. They've seen what it looks like when someone doesn't run. She tilted her head. You mean you? I mean all of us. Choosing to stay changed more than we thought. She looked at the old projector screen flickering in the background. A map of old Technar-controlled sectors was pulsing in weak yellow. They're not active anymore, she said. Kael pointed to a blinking red dot. That one is... She leaned forward. What is it, a listening post? It went quiet after the pulse, but now it's transmitting again. Sporadic, garbled, but it's Technar code. She stared for a long time. Do we have to run? Kael shook his head. No, we will prepare. For the next 10 days, the renewal core shifted from sanctuary to stronghold. Not with weapons, but with intent. The children, now numbering over 50, began working in crews. They repaired outer panels, reinforced shielding, updated systems that Kael himself had considered long obsolete. Syria formed a communications team. They began collecting the fragmented signals from across the stars. Each one added to a growing archive of voices, stories, maps, and warnings. Nexa established a broadcast journal. Not for distress, for hope. Every third evening, she recorded a message. Simple, honest, speaking to anyone who might be listening. You are not broken, she said in one. You were interrupted. Now you can begin again. On the 11th day, the stars shifted again. Kael was the first to see it. A fleet, not Technar, at least not fully. The signatures were altered, ships retrofitted, but the core patterns were familiar. Someone's trying to rebuild, he said. Syria joined him at the observation station. Military hybrid. Maybe private contractors. Could be old Technar loyalists. Could be worse. They watched in silence. They haven't found us yet, she said. They will. Nexa entered quietly. She had heard. They're looking for the signal, she said. Kael nodded. They've been tracing the pattern. Not ours, but the original Eden broadcast. Something survived beyond us. She moved to the console and ran her hand along the surface. I want to speak to them. Saria turned sharply. No. Kael didn't say anything. I won't give them anything, Nexa continued. But if they're listening, they need to hear from someone who remembers what it was meant to be. Saria crossed her arms. You're still a child. I'm not just a child, Nexa said. I was the anchor. I was the weapon. And I chose something else. That's a voice they don't expect. Kael finally spoke. She's right. The message she sent was short, a single phrase embedded in a locked frequency. You failed to control us, but you gave us the strength to rebuild. It echoed into space. No reply came, not immediately. But the fleet changed course, not toward them, away, as if something in her words had unsettled even those who believed the past could be reconstructed. That night, Nexa walked with Kael along the ridge. Below, the lights of the renewal core flickered gently. Music played from one of the lower decks. Someone was singing, badly. I used to think survival was everything she said. Kael watched the stars. Most people do, but now I think survival is just the first chapter. He nodded. What's the next one? She turned to him, a quiet fire in her eyes. Becoming something worth surviving for. Section 11, rain fell on the renewal core for the first time in recorded memory. Not artificial condensation from the cooling vents, not programmed mist filtered through atmosphere regulation units. Real rain. Falling from clouds shaped by weather systems, no longer controlled by Technar's climate grids. Water that had not been commanded, only allowed. The children ran through it like it was a gift from the stars. Some laughed. Some simply stared at the sky, mouths open, trying to catch the droplets. One of the youngest, a boy with skin that shimmered like copper, whispered that the rain was alive, that it carried songs. Kael stood at the doorway of the west entrance watching. He did not join them, but he did not stop them either. Beside him, Saria watched with her arms crossed, but her eyes soft. When I was little, she said, I dreamed of storms. Kael gave a small nod. And now I dream of what comes after. Inside the core, Nexa sat at the broadcast terminal. Her fingers hovered over the console. She had been receiving more signals, some weak, others strong. All of them carried the same theme change. In distant systems, former slave colonies were rising, some with confusion, some with fire. The pulse had not freed everyone, but it had awakened something. She tapped into a protected channel encoded with her own resonance pattern. It connected her not just to the galaxy, but to those who had once been like her. Children built, not born. Trained, not raised. Message record begins, she said, and leaned closer. I'm Nexa. I used to be an anchor, a living node in someone else's system. They built me to listen, to transmit, to obey, but I learned how to remember. She paused. I'm not offering war. I'm offering a memory. If you're like me, if you've woken up and don't know what to be next, come find us. She closed the line. Kael entered a moment later. He said nothing about what he had heard, just sat beside her. She looked at him. Was that too much? No, he replied. That was enough. Days passed with cautious hope. The garden beds flourished under real light. The children formed groups of their own design, some to teach, some to cook, some to explore. Kael watched with quiet pride as they created systems without needing hierarchy. They did not need to be ruled. They needed to be seen. Then came the visitor. No ship, no fleet, just one person. He arrived on foot. Kael spotted him first through the ridge monitors. A lone figure in a long coat walking slowly across the ashen terrain. Not armed, not disguised, just walking. Saria met Kael at the entry gate. You know him, no? Do we let him in? Kael watched the screen a moment longer, then nodded. Yes. The man introduced himself simply. My name is Orion. No title, no origin. Kael kept his responses short-measured. Orion was calm but not passive. His eyes moved like someone who had seen the inside of systems and survived them. When asked why he came, his answer was honest. I followed the echo. Saria narrowed her eyes. You mean the broadcast? No. The choice. He looked at Nexa, who stood silently nearby. I was part of the final design team before Technar collapsed inward. I saw the weapon they made. I knew it would one day wake up. I just didn't know. It would become this. Nexa tilted her head. This, he gestured around. Life, not control. Growth, not expansion. I wanted to see if the end product could be chosen, and now I see it did. Kael studied him. Are you here to help? Orion smiled faintly. No, I'm here to listen. He stayed, not as a leader, not as a voice of wisdom, just as a set of hands. He helped clean the hydro valves, repaired solar panels, and sat beside the youngest when they were scared of the wind at night. He asked questions, never gave orders. Kael began to trust him slowly. Saria took longer. Nexa perhaps trusted him too easily. One night she sat with Orion beneath the skylight chamber. Did you really help design the resonance lattice? I did. And did you know what it would do to us? Orion was silent for a long time. I knew what it could do, but not what it would do. She frowned. Is that supposed to be comforting? No, he replied. It's supposed to be honest. She turned away. Do you regret it? He answered without hesitation. Every day, until I found your signal. More messages began arriving. Not from Technar remnants, but from others like them. Colonies that had broken away. Research stations repurposed as sanctuaries. Places where the idea had spread not just freedom, but resonance. The word was changing. It no longer meant control, it meant alignment. Not of thoughts, but of purpose. Kael gathered the community that evening, all of them. Over 60 now, from dozens of different worlds, ages, and paths. They sat together in the courtyard, the stars clear above, no filters, no interference. Kael stood with Saria and Nexa beside him. We started this place to survive, he said. But survival is no longer enough. He paused. We have a chance to shape something, not just here, but beyond this crater, beyond this world. Others are listening. Some are already coming. We didn't plan for that. But we are ready. He looked at Nexa. She stepped forward. No one chooses where they come from, but we get to choose where we go next. I'm not a system. I'm not a signal. I'm a child of what was broken, and I am choosing to build. Silence followed. Then someone began to clap. Others joined. It echoed off the rocks, soft but real. The children smiled, even the quiet ones, even the ones who had not spoken since arrival. That night, Kael returned to the observatory and looked up at the stars. He saw a new signal blinking faintly near the horizon. Not Technar, not a threat, a beginning. The stars carried stories now. Not commands, no warnings, not surveillance logs encrypted in malicious code. Real stories, raw and imperfect, sent through fractured data streams and unstable relays. They came from distant moons, shattered orbitals, forgotten agricultural domes, and reactivated mining vessels where the slaves had turned off their overseers and simply began again. Nexa read every message. She never responded immediately. She listened first. Then she forwarded some to Kael, some to Saria, and some to the children who had started calling themselves the Echo Keepers. Those children didn't want to fight. They wanted to archive, to preserve every signal as if it were sacred. As if each one whispered proof that they were not alone. Kael didn't always understand the emotional gravity of it, but he respected it. He saw it in the way Nexa leaned closer when she read something truly painful. In the way she stopped breathing when someone spoke of breaking free only to lose their home to pirates or internal sabotage. The galaxy wasn't healing in one straight line. It was fracturing in new ways, but at least now it was doing so with choice. One morning, a new alert appeared in the observatory. A single word blinked in crimson reactivation. Kael stared at the terminal. His fingers hovered just above the keys. The signal wasn't Technar branded, but it came from a cluster of relay towers, once under Technar's influence. He ran a scan. What he found was worse than he expected. The towers had been seized by an unregistered faction. Former Technar commanders repurposing the old tools. But this time they weren't trying to rebuild the control grid. They were using the remaining infrastructure to build something else. A pulse weapon. Smaller in scale, more focused, designed to burn memory pathways instead of manipulating them. Saria entered the room moments later, having been pinged automatically. They're trying to erase again, she said quietly. Kael nodded. And they're close. How close, 3 systems away. She cursed under her breath. What do they want? Kael looked grim. They want the resonance signature. They want Nexa. Not to control, to destroy. The next meeting was immediate. The core hall is filled with more than 80 people now. Faces from every planet Kael had never planned to see again. And every face turned toward the center where Nexa stood calmly, hands clasped in front of her. "They're coming," she said. "Not like last time. Not with drones and programming. This time they want to delete it." The room remained still. "I won't run." Her voice didn't shake. "And I don't want any of you to run either. But you don't have to stay for me." "You never did." Cal stepped forward, then standing beside her. "This isn't just about Nexa, or the Pulse, or Technar." He looked at every person in the room. "This is about what we are becoming." That night, the Defensive Council met. Orion was there seated at the edge of the table, listening more than speaking. Syria outlined the attack parameters based on the scans. Kyle proposed rerouting the internal grid into a shielding lattice untested, but theoretically strong enough to protect the core's mind architecture. Nexa offered something unexpected. "I want to speak to them." Syria stiffened. "Absolutely not. They're fractured. They don't agree. I've seen their command hierarchy splintering in the chatter." Cal frowned. "Even if you're right, what could you say that would change anything?" Nexa looked down at her hands, then up again. "I can remind them of what it felt like to be free. Even if only one of them remembers, that's one less weapon pointed at us." Orion finally spoke. "She's not asking for permission. She's telling us where the future leads." No one argued after that. The transmission went out at dawn. Nexa's voice filled every repurposed Technar frequency still open across the nearby systems. "This is Nexa. You made me. And I forgive you." She paused. "But I will not let you erase what we built. You have the tools to kill the signal. You do not have the right." A long breath. "I don't want to fight you. I want to outlive you." The message ended. Cal killed the outgoing relay before a reply could come. Syria turned to him. "That was risky. She made her choice. And if they ignore it," Kael looked toward the sunrise filtering through the dust, "then we find out what it means to defend without becoming what they were." The attack came 3 days later. Not a full assault, a test. 2 drop vessels, 6 drones, and a small team of neural interceptors. They approached fast, cutting through local space with repurposed stealth drives. They weren't here to conquer. They were here to extract Nexa. Kyle activated the outer shields. Syria launched signal decoys across the adjacent canyons. The children were already in lockdown formation. No fear in their faces, only focus. Nexa stood in the main corridor, not hidden, not armored, waiting. The attackers breached the first layer, expecting resistance. They found stillness and a voice. "I see you." The lead interceptor hesitated. Nexa's presence pulsed across the local frequency. Not aggression. Resonance. "You don't have to obey anymore," she said. "You can stop." 3 of the 6 drones powered down. The others fired. The outer shield flared, absorbing the impact. Kyle activated the internal pulse reflector. Syria overloaded the targeting grid. The drones that remained lost signal and spiraled into the dirt, crashing like dying stars. The 2 interceptors who made it to the gate never crossed the threshold. One of them dropped his weapon. The other removed his helmet and wept. When it was over, Nexa walked out alone. She placed her hand on the forehead of the fallen drone and whispered something no one could hear. Then she turned and walked back inside. Kael met her halfway. "You scared me," he admitted. She smiled softly. "Good. That means you care." He exhaled, trying not to laugh. "You want to lead?" "No," she said. "But I want to carry." In the days that followed, something shifted in the air. Other settlements began reaching out more frequently. A community on Delta Gray requested access to the Renewal Corps' signal templates. A station orbiting the ruins of Yedros III offered to share water purification codes in exchange for songs. The children responded to all of it. They didn't just answer, they connected. And across 1,000 broken networks, one truth became louder than any system ever built to silence it. We are still here. We are choosing again. A new kind of map began to form. It was not written in borders or star systems. It did not mark empires or trade routes. It unfolded through voices in coded fragments, hand-drawn charts scanned into old comms, GPS tags wrapped in lullabies. A living network scattered across forgotten moons, drifting habitats, asteroid gardens and derelict stations that had become something else. They called it the lattice. Nexa called it a promise. Each node in the lattice was another place like the renewal core. Different shapes, different scars, but the same seed, a group that had chosen not to rebuild what was broken, but to grow something entirely new. Kael tracked each node on a hidden server, stitched together from old satellite guts and portable power cells. It wasn't clean, but it worked. The more pings they received, the more he believed the change was no longer isolated. The pulse had been the spark, but the lattice was becoming the fire. One afternoon, while repairing an exterior heat condenser with Syria, Kael received a direct signal on his private channel. It was encrypted in an old format, one he hadn't seen in 20 years. He opened it. The message contained no greeting, no name, just 6 words. "We failed, but you didn't forget." Attached was a set of coordinates. Kael forwarded them to Syria. "Looks like someone's ready to talk." She narrowed her eyes. "You think it's real, only one way to find out." They left the next day. Kael, Syria, Nexa. The children insisted on staying behind. Not out of fear, but out of pride. "We'll hold the course," said the oldest boy, nodding confidently. "Go, be ambassadors or rebels or whatever it is you are now." Kael had smiled at that. Nexa hugged each of them. Not because she had to, but because every goodbye could be the last, and she had learned to value the space between certainty and faith. The transport skimmer was upgraded now. Quiet, fast, powered by a solar conversion array that doubled as a passive defense grid. Nexa had helped design it, and Kael had tested it to within an inch of its limits. They followed the coordinates to a dead orbit above a gas giant. A single platform floated there, half collapsed, shielded from detection by a cloak netting that pulsed in rhythmic intervals. A trick older than Kael himself. They docked. Inside, the lights flickered. The walls groaned. But someone had been keeping it alive. In the central chamber sat a man. Old, thin, wrapped in a technician's coat that bore the insignia of Technar scratched through with a blade. He looked up and smiled. "I thought you'd be taller." Kael didn't return the smile. "Thought you'd be dead." The man laughed, coughing. Syria stepped forward. "Why call us now?" The man's eyes moved to Nexa. "She called me." Nexa blinked. "I didn't send anything." "You did," he said, "with the way you live." Kael frowned. "You were part of the design team. I was the last one. The last to stay when everyone else ran." He reached into a bag at his feet and pulled out a small core crystal. Its color was strange, neither red nor blue nor white. A shimmer of all three. "This is the first lattice node, before it was corrupted, before they figured out how to twist it into control." Kael took it. It was warm, alive. "I couldn't stop what they built," the man said. "But I saved the beginning, and now I will give it to you." Syria's voice was quiet. "Why now? Because the lattice is growing, and soon it will need a center, not to rule, but to hold." He stood shakily. "And because I'm dying." Nexa stepped forward and hugged him without hesitation. He flinched, then relaxed. "You are nothing like what they made," he whispered. "No," she said. "I'm what we became." They returned home with the node. The children gathered to see it. No ceremony, just awe. Kael placed it into the central console. It hummed once, and the lattice lit up like a constellation reborn. New signals, clearer voices, a shared heartbeat. In the weeks that followed, everything accelerated. Other cores reached out. Entire former Technar systems began opening their archives. Engineers who had once built weapons now built water systems. Former captains offered trade routes. The renewal core became more than a refuge. It became a symbol, a node others could align to not by authority, but by choice. Nexa led the conversations now. She no longer hesitated before speaking. She no longer flinched when old code echoed in the messages. She had become the story they told. Not as a savior, but as the one who stayed. One night, Kael found her standing beneath the starlight dome. She held the lattice node in her palm, watching it glow. "You did more than survive," he said. "I had help." He stepped beside her. "Where do we go from here?" She smiled. "We don't go anywhere." He raised an eyebrow. "We grow." The renewal core was never meant to be permanent. That had been Kael's first thought when he laid its foundation in the silence after the fall. It was a shelter, a pause, a breath between storms. But somewhere between then and now, it had become something more than stone and shielding. It had become a memory that refused to fade. And now it was becoming something else entirely, a home with roots in the stars. Nexa stood on the platform above the central garden, her glow dimmed to a soft warmth. Dozens of children gathered below, many of them once strangers, now calling each other by names they had chosen for themselves. Some ran maintenance, some studied. Some simply listened. She looked across them and spoke not with volume, but with gravity. "The lattice is not mine," she said. "It belongs to all of us, because it grew from our refusal to be what they built." She held up the original lattice node, the one retrieved from the dying engineer. It pulsed gently in her palm. "This is not a relic. It's the beginning. A memory that we choose to remember, not because it was perfect, but because it gave us a reason to become better." The children listened, even the youngest, even the ones who still struggled with trust. "We were abandoned, repurposed, broken, but we are more than our damage." She turned to Kael and Saria, both standing near the base of the platform. "We are not survivors anymore. We are architects." In the following days, signals poured in. New nodes activated in deep space. Mobile lattice beacons were mounted on retrofitted cargo ships, spreading the signal across 5 systems. A research vessel, once used to harvest neural energy, now housed the first memory school where no child was taught what to think, only how to remember. They called the movement echosone, a term that Nexa had whispered once in sleep and that the others adopted without question, because it sounded like the truth. Kael found a quiet corner one evening. The room was once used for weapon calibration. Now it held plants and half-finished musical instruments made from scavenged parts. He sat down with a tool in hand but didn't start working. Saria entered and joined him. "She's not a child anymore," she said softly. "No," Kael replied. "She's what comes after." Saria smiled faintly. "We did something good." Kael looked at her. "No," he said. "We protected something good long enough for it to grow." That night, Nexa stood outside the renewal core alone. Above her, the stars shimmered, no longer filtered through fear. She opened a channel, not encrypted, not hidden, just open, and she spoke. To anyone who still feels like they were made, not born. To anyone who was built to obey, but now wants to choose. "We're here." She let the silence speak for a moment. "You don't have to come. You don't have to fight. But if you want to remember who you were before they gave you a number, the door's open." She ended the message. No signature, no name, only a choice. The next day, a new child arrived. No ship, no escort, just a girl no older than 8 with mechanical legs and an old transmitter strapped to her wrist. She did not speak at first, but when she saw Nexa, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of metal shaped like a flower. Nexa knelt down and took it. Then she hugged the girl without a word. That evening, Kael stood alone on the ridge and looked up. He saw new lights moving across the stars, not warships, messengers, not invasions, returns. And he understood in a quiet, aching kind of way that everything they had suffered had not been the end. It had been the soil. In the end, the renewal core was not a weapon, not a fortress, not even a safe house. It was a story, a living, breathing testament to what happened when someone chose to stay. When Kael found Nexa in that broken pod, he did not know he was holding the future in his arms. He only knew she was scared, and he refused to walk away. That one act changed everything, because kindness when planted in a broken world grows wild. And when Saria returned, choosing to reclaim her daughter from the machine she once helped design, she shattered the idea that legacy must define you. They were not heroes. They were flawed. They were tired. They had regrets too deep to name. But they stood, and that was enough. Nexa never wanted to be a symbol. But when she spoke, the stars listened. Because she didn't promise salvation. She promised a memory, choice, the right to become something new. And across the galaxy, others answered. The systems that once enslaved began to crack. Not because of war, but because belief is more contagious than fear. Now the lattice spreads, and if you listen closely across static and silence, you will hear it. The pulse, soft, unyielding. Not a command, Not control, but a whisper I chose to stay.